Professor Wham. We're trying something a little different this evening. And yes, this background is a free background from the wonderful film Spirited Away. You can get these free, I guess they're wallpapers, Zoom backgrounds. You can use them as such from Ghibli Studios. Or Ghibli Studios, however you pronounce it. But this is a scene from Spirited Away, and I thought that this would be a very good backdrop for the different thing that I will be doing in this video. One of the things that I do in my actual spiritual work that a lot of people don't know about is that I do certain forms of divination. I used to do these kinds of practices publicly. In fact, for a number of years, I worked at various Renaissance festivals, and I've worked at psychic fairs. At a particular point in my life, much earlier in my life, I partially made my living doing these things. Tarot cards, runes, astrology. I gave up doing all of that because I was never comfortable taking money for it. I mean, I know that there's a lot of debate about doing that kind of thing, and I don't judge people who do it. You know, I understand the argument that, you know, in this world in which we live, giving that kind of advice or having that kind of insight, especially if you're good at it, can be considered a commodity. And oftentimes, at least this was the case when I did this sort of work publicly, oftentimes how you're really acting is, or what you're really doing is a kind of counseling. You're actually, you know, providing a mechanism whereby people can talk to you about the things that are really happening in their lives. I never felt like I was really actually telling the future, except maybe a few times. Those aren't the types of readings I tended to get. But I still felt funny taking money for it. And that's just me. You know, that's just me. And I think partly it's because I believe that things within the spiritual realm are actually free. They're, you know, spirit is available to everyone. The kinds of insights that you can get with divination or provide with divination, that kind of information is actually available to anyone. And so while I don't critique anybody who seeks it out or who, you know, charges money for it, it's just not what I do. I make my money in other ways. But that's not to say that I don't still use it from time to time. And I've been asked a lot in the last, I don't know, couple of years, really. It kind of comes and goes in phases. But I've been asked a lot lately to provide insight, or, you know, divinatory insight, I guess, if you will, to things that are going on in the world. Sometimes people are asking specifically for themselves. Sometimes people are asking, you know, more general questions. And so I guess part of it also is that one of the things that has amused me is that for some reason on my YouTube feed, I listen to YouTube a lot while I'm working. I'm able to do that. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts and, you know, and things come up. And so sometimes I'll just listen to the next thing that comes up just out of curiosity. And one of the things that has started to come up in my feed, and I don't know why, it just started coming up, is a large number of, especially tarot readers. I don't know what it is specifically about tarot readers, or card readers, people who do cartomancy, trying to figure out what's going to happen with Trump and what's going on, I mean, with the latest political stuff. And I suppose that's all really normal, but I've listened to a number of those. And they vary in terms of quality and in terms, some people do cards and remote viewing, and some people do channeling and cards, and there's this one channel where you have two card readers that are both reading simultaneously, and they sort of check each other out and actually have a discussion about what each are getting about certain things, which is kind of interesting, actually. Anyway, just because I've gotten so many questions, I decided that I would present some divinatory, they're not answers. They're, I mean, they are responses. They're not answers. They are responses to questions. And I think before I do these things, it's important to understand how I see this kind of work, and where I see the value and the limitations of it. I think that the value of divination is that if it's done right, if it's done correctly, that doesn't mean it's prophecy. It doesn't mean it comes true, because all any act of divination is, and this is why I often don't like to do it for like large groups or for world events, because there are just too many variables at play. At any given time when you're doing a divination, what you're doing is tapping into your connection to something. And so the response is going to be tempered by your own tendencies, the manner in which the question is asked, the context of the question, the medium that you're using. Like for the things for what I'm going to be doing this evening, I'm actually going to be using the runes. I don't use cards for stuff like this. I do know how to read cards, but I don't tend to use cards for the kinds of questions that are going to be asked. And these questions that I'm going to ask are questions that have been asked of me. It's not that I don't have certain curiosities about these questions, but they aren't the kinds of questions that I would normally ask. They are other people that have asked these, what do you think about this? What do you think is going to, what do you think is going to happen? My skeptical mind is like, I don't have the faintest idea what's going to happen. And that's the other part of this, is that no matter how good you are as a diviner, no matter how good you are only ever going to deal with probabilities, because all kinds of realities are in flux constantly. And so that's part of the reason why prophecy is such an iffy thing. There's a wonderful scene in for those of you who are familiar with the series, you may not be familiar with the series, the science fiction series Babylon 5. There's a wonderful scene where the wife of the Centauri emperor, the Centauri are an alien species, an extraterrestrial species. The wife of the Centauri emperor, the ex-Centauri emperor, comes to Babylon 5, which is this massive space station, and is going to do a reading for the Centauri ambassador, whose name is Londo Mollari. And the woman who plays, it just so happens that the actress who plays the emperor's wife is I can't was Majel Barrett Roddenberry, the same person who was married to Gene Roddenberry, who started Star Trek. But this was and she played a couple of characters, of course, in Star Trek, and was famously the voice of the computer on Star Trek, like The New Generation, for a long time. But she also appeared this one time in Babylon 5. And there are specific reasons why she did this, but she, in the story of Babylon 5, women Centauri women often have prophetic abilities, and so they are often, and they're kind of semi-telepathic, and so they're often consulted in terms of the outcomes of battles and political events and things like that. So she does a reading for the ambassador, who is fated to become emperor himself and a whole bunch of other things. Anyway, Londo asks the classic question of her, like, how do I know when these things are coming to pass? How will I know if these prophecies that you see will unfold? And she says something really brilliant. And this is what I say. It's like, take the message for what it is. It will become clear at some point. Don't try to make it something. Don't try to fulfill it or not fulfill it. See it as symbolic of something. It may turn out to be literal, but it probably won't be literal in the way that you mean. I'm not quoting her exactly, but that's, take the message for what it is. Take the symbols for what they are, and just work with them. It's kind of like a dream. Divination is like a dream. So what I'm basically going to do is, and this is a very simple type of reading that I used to do at the Renaissance festivals. You have people, they come and they sit in front of you, and they usually have very specific questions. And so and they were almost always questions about health, wealth, and their kids, their family. Those were the classic three. And sometimes they would diverge off into money or things like that. But those are the classic ones. You're interested about your family or your love life, whether you're going to make money or not, or get a job, and whether you're going to be healthy or not. These are the classic things. So I kind of decided that I would posit these questions in kind of that way. And then all I do is I pick one rune. What I like about runes is that they give you a yes or no answer, or they can give you a yes or no answer. They can also give you more than that, or they can give me more than that. In fact, for me, the runes are superior to the cards because the cards are very subtle in a way. You have to have other cards with them a lot of times in order to derive a context. But runes are very discrete. Each one of them, even though each one of them has a complex of meanings, multi-layers of meaning, each one of them also has a very distinct meaning. And each one of them has a voice. And what I have noticed for myself, and not everybody that does runes knows this or experiences this necessarily, but what I've noticed for myself is that the runes are distinct enough in terms of their voice that when I pick something, it speaks to me. It's almost like I tune in to another frequency or another field, another part of myself, if you will, and a story unfolds that is connected to whatever question is asked. And even if it's not literally true, it's generally meaningful, if that makes sense. And I've had a lot of success with them. So, and keep in mind, these questions, the questions that I'm going to address are not necessarily the questions I would ask, but these are the questions that other people have asked me, or that were being asked in some of these videos that I was watching. And they're the kinds of questions that I've seen floating around in the internet. Now, the one thing that I do have to say here, because this is important to say, and apparently this is important to say from a legal perspective, is that this is all for entertainment. This, do not take any of this literally. If anything intense comes up, I am not advocating anything. Okay, I am not advocating anything. I am not making any proclamations. So you can just take this or leave this. It's entirely up to you. So the first question that I've been asked, I don't know why people have asked me this question, but the first question that I've been asked and that I have seen asked a lot on these videos is, will President Trump finish his term, his second term? Now, obviously, this is a yes or no question, okay? So, but yes or no can mean different things. So we'll see what the runes say. So will Trump finish his term? Keep in mind, this is for entertainment purposes only. So let's see what happens here. And again, I just pick out one rune. I'm almost afraid to pull one out. Okay, the rune that I got, it's an Anglo-Saxon rune. The rune is Ston. And it means an altar. It literally means like an altar or a stone. And it's interesting because this is an ambivalent rune to this question. And that can mean several different things. It can mean that there are too many things in flux to be able to answer this as a yes or no question. It can also mean that in a curious way, even if he makes it to the end of his term, he will be much diminished. It's almost as if, even at this point, he's not really the one calling the shots. Now, there's no indication of who is calling the shots here. Of course, you can just imagine all of the conspiracy that might go around that. But I'm not talking in geopolitical terms. I'm talking in spiritual terms. Because what this could also seem to indicate is that whatever his course is, it's set. Whether he makes it to the end or not, from our perspective, is not clear and may even not be for us to know because of the tumult that that would cause were we to know it in either way. But there is something standing behind him that will determine what this fate is, because obviously he'll either make it to the end of his term or not. I mean, those are the two options, right? So there is something standing behind him that whatever the outcome is going to be, it will not be the result, I'll put it this way, of his choice. Okay, so that's what that one's about. And that is not actually the answer that I that I anticipated with that. So I will leave that with that. There's also, the other thing about runes is that there's a time limit on them. So, and you can set a time limit. They generally tend to be shorter, so it's best not to do like things that are way in the future for runes because they're really dealing with immediate energies. So in this particular case, obviously, I was thinking about 2028, so I was projecting a little bit into the future, but generally runes tend to run no more than a year or two ahead. So we'll see what happens with that. The next question is that I've seen asked a lot is the U.S. within the next, I'm going to say within the next year or two, rather than like 2028, is the is the U.S. going to end up in a shooting war? And there are several variations of this question that I have seen. So let's see what it says first. Will the U.S. end up in a shooting war? And we're not going to be yet specific about with whom or what kind. In other words, not a proxy war, but a shooting war. And again, this is for entertainment purposes. I always have to say that. But the rune that I got here is the rune Ores, which in this context would generally be considered an affirmative. With a, what's the word? With an affirmative with a conditional. If we are become involved in a shooting war, it will not be a sudden war. There will be a lead up to it. It will be the result of, it will be a manifestation of known factors. In other words, it won't be a sudden kind of thing. There will be warnings about it. There will be planning regarding it. And so it will be seen as kind of a natural outcome of some kind of process. Now, natural, what does that mean? Since I don't consider war to be natural, but this rune also indicates that whatever the tensions are that may lead up to this manifestation, and again, it's a may lead up to this manifestation, these are tensions of long standing. These are issues of long standing, so that in a way, there appears to be a kind of weird inevitability to the conflict. Now, in order to unpack this a little bit, because I have seen a number of different people online talking about different kinds of wars, we can become more specific about the kinds of conflict that we might be talking about. So, for example, we could ask, is this conflict or shooting conflict going to be a civil war in the United States? Or will it involve civil conflict? Again, this is for entertainment purposes. This isn't very entertaining, but you know what I mean. The rune that I'm getting here is Jera, which is the rune of harvest. And it's also a rune of cause and effect. In other words, effects that have been generated from causes. It's a fruitful outcome, if you will. And this fruitful outcome can be good or bad. And in this context, this would indicate that it is very possible that there will be some armed conflict here in the United States. Which, if that were to be the case, it would explain some of the qualities of Ores, which I just read, because the conflict being of long standing. The other thing about Jera is that usually, I mean, the good thing about it is that usually whatever results it's talking about are short-lived. So it's something that is, as a result, it's kind of like the fruits that are reaped because of what has been sown, that kind of thing. But it's also of short duration. So because harvests, they tend to be, karma. You can think of it as karma, if you will. Tend to be of short duration, unless there's a lot of seeding that has gone into it. So that is a possibility. That is a possibility. So we can also ask, are we going to get, is the United States going to go to war with any allies, like with NATO or any of the other powers in the world? And again, this is for entertainment purposes. And what I am getting is one of the Anglo-Saxon runes. And it is a rune that generally indicates affirmative. Now, in this instance, because of its connection to the previous rune, Ores, not Jera, but Ores, what this in this context would indicate is that what if we were to get into a worldwide conflict, a world conflict against allies, we would have allies of our own. In other words, we would not be going up against anybody by ourselves. You can read into that whatever you want. Okay. So we have a lot of possibility of conflict here. Two other related questions that I have seen connected to this are, one, within the next 2 years, and I'm going to limit it to 2 years. Within the next 2 years, is there a danger of nuclear war? Tactical or otherwise, it really doesn't matter. And again, this is for entertainment purposes. I hate this question. I got an inverted Feo. Now, if I had gotten an upright Feo, that would have not been good. Okay? But it is inverted. And what that means is no. At least in, if somebody were asking me these questions, I would say, at least according to what is going on right now, regardless of the posturing that is happening, that there are no indications at this point that any of these conflicts that we might get involved in would involve the use of nuclear weapons. That still is not considered to be a legitimate possibility. Rogue states aside, at least not something that we would start. There are two other questions that are associated with this, and I will ask them at this time. The first one is, does the United States have to worry within the next few years, the next 2 or 3 years, about the possibility of a large terrorist act? And again, this is for educational and entertainment purposes. What I'm getting here is it's the rune Awaz, which is normally a very positive rune, and it's partially inverted. And what I'm picking up from it in relation to these other runes is that probably there will not be. However, there may be rumors thereof. And it is possible that one of the conflicts that has been mentioned, if it is initiated due to the rumor of or using a possible terrorist act as either using the possibility of a terrorist attack as an excuse to do something. In other words, preempting a terrorist attack in much the same way that we went into Iraq the second time in order to preempt. That was if you remember, that was the excuse that was given. I mean, 9/11 occurred, but Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, but we wanted an excuse to go in there. So there was this excuse that was conjured up about weapons weapons of mass destruction, which we claimed that they had, and we were going in there in case they were going to use it. It was like a preemptively trying to keep him from using them. It was ridiculous, caused a lot of problems, but it would be a similar kind of thing. In other words, the rumor or the stated rumor of some kind of terrorist act might be an excuse to do something preemptive that would then get us involved in some other conflict, either within the United States itself or with others. I hope I'm making sense. And a question that I wanted to ask, and this is my question, is will we see the UN as we know it dissolve in the next 2 to 3 years? This is for entertainment purposes. Oh, come here. Sometimes they all ball up on one side. Interesting. This is a rune that has many interesting connotations. It's Ing. It's the one that, if you're familiar with the Elder Futhark, looks like a little diamond. And this is an interesting rune because it actually, for this question, would indicate that there is a high probability that the UN as some kind of body will survive. It will go through some changes. It may sort of pull in on itself a little bit. The United States may become less involved with it. Or, its influence, especially in the United States, may diminish. But it will continue to exist as some kind of body, although what I'm picking up from this is that it may move its location. Currently it's in New York City, but I'm getting the possibility that it may move somewhere, like, say, to a neutral country like Switzerland, in Geneva or something like that. I don't know why I'm getting that, but I can see that happening. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but what I'm sensing is a distancing, like a physical distancing of the body of the UN from the body of the United States. And so that could signal a kind of a physical move for it, whether or not the United States chooses to remain part of it or not. But that wherever it ends up, it will continue to exercise, it will continue to exist, and in a sense, the sense that I'm getting is it will continue to exist, and it will kind of gather itself together, whoever is in it, will kind of gather themselves together and kind of hold the values of it, the dream of it together, like a seed, getting ready to germinate again. It's kind of an interesting image, really. So let's get away from war and all of that. Another question that was asked a lot is the American economy going to crash, especially within the next year or two? This is for entertainment purposes, so we'll see. Will it crash? Oh, this is interesting. The rune that I got is Berkana. It's an interesting rune because it's neither a yes or a no in the hard sense for a question like this. It does indicate fundamental changes, in the same way that winter signals, a cessation of plant growth in the northern hemisphere, a cessation of plant growth, and but it also represents new growth, new revitalization, innovation, healing, and sometimes in unexpected places. So the way I would read this is that there is going to be a period of difficulty. This represents the birch tree, and the birch tree is an interesting tree in the northern hemisphere. It's one of the first trees that emerged after the last ice age and diversified across the northern hemisphere, in both in Eurasia and in the Americas, in North America, in Turtle Island. And it also represents on the Eurasian steppes, it represents the first tree that flowers in spring. So it's the first tree that kind of shows itself when winter leaves. But there's always the assumption that it comes out of bad stuff. You know what I mean? In other words, there is a winter, there is a time of difficulty, a time of scarcity, but then there is stuff that comes out of it, and it comes out in unexpected places. The birch tree in Eurasia doesn't flower the way the birch trees flower here. They flower from the top down, which is interesting. And so seeing the birch trees doing that, and doing that in proper order, is a good sign, basically. So what I would take this to mean is that there is going to be some real difficulty at first. It's going to be winter first, kind of maybe, Game of Thrones kind of winter. The winter is coming. It's weird because I've never even seen a single shot of that show other than stills, but I know the slogans from it. It's so bizarre. But there will be rebirth in particular places. The other thing I meant to say about the conflict in the United States, like if there is civil conflict that becomes armed, it's not going to be everywhere. Okay. The other thing that I was getting from that is that it's going to take place in certain locations in the United States. There will be other locations where there will be there will be conflict, but it will not be open armed conflict in that way, because our country is huge. And so it would be very, very difficult to have like a pitched civil war every single place you go. It just I can't even imagine that happening in Wyoming, for example. So anyway, it's very interesting. The economy in the short term probably will crash some. It will not affect everyone in exactly the same way. There will be new growth that comes out of it. The important thing to understand is that this is organic growth. This is not growth that comes from the government. This is, well, they're trying to destroy that anyway. This isn't growth that comes from the government. This is growth that comes organically from people helping people, from places in the United States where people reach out to each other beyond our boundaries, beyond the limits we've tried to set on each other, and they actually do that work together. And that's what makes it organic. That's what makes it, whatever rebirth is coming in that regard will make it possible. Another question I see being asked a lot is, will Elon Musk remain as influential as he is currently? Will he retain his position as, whatever his position is? I mean, I think of him as like, President 2.0, or I call him Elania. He's the actual first lady, that kind of thing. So, however, will he retain his position as an important person? And again, this is for entertainment purposes only. No. That's a pretty plain no. The rune that I got is an Anglo-Saxon rune. It's called Calc, and it represents the Grail, basically. And it was reversed. So no, he will not. This is just a plain no. So it's not clear when he will depart. There's no indication here that he's going to die or anything like that. I mean, there's none of that. But there will, in fact, what I'm getting from this is at some point he will get bored. At some point, he will not be able to affect the changes that he wants to, and it won't necessarily be because it'll just be because a government is different from what he's used to. I mean, there's all kinds of rumors about how he's going to, tank Social Security and change everything to Bitcoin and all. He doesn't really have the power to do all of that. And there are too many other competing billionaires and forces that are around him to be able to really kind of do that unilaterally. I think at some point, he's just going to get tired of it and he's just going to walk off. I mean, that's kind of what this indicates, is that at some point he just kind of throws up his hands and just says, no, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. He's also very thin-skinned. He doesn't deal with criticism very well. So if he begins to have like real debates or real tensions or real fights with any of the other billionaires or with Trump, if there's a falling out between the two of them, he's just going to leave because he can. And he'll be like, oh, take Starlink with me, blah, whatever. According to this, he's just going to leave at some point. I'm not getting the sense he's going to be drummed out, but that he'll just leave. Another question I've seen answered is, will resistance win? In other words, the resistance that is being offered against this regime and the dream of this regime, will this resistance win? For entertainment purposes only. No. The resistance by itself as an open force will not win. That is not what will win. What will win the rune that I'm getting here is Cotter, not Cotter, is Thor, and it's reversed. And what this would indicate for this question is, because of the nature of the rune that came up, if the rune had been upright, it would have actually been counseling armed resistance. In other words, really aggressive resistance is what would win. It'd be, yes, aggressive resistance will win, in the sense of, violent protests, taking up arms against the government, that kind of thing. This is more indicating that the power of resistance cannot be something that is overt in a manner that will get the attention of the authorities. Let me see if I can clarify this a little bit. I don't know if I'm being clear here. In other words, the resistance that will work is not the resistance that is kind of the way we expect resistance. Yes, okay, here we go. Got Odin's eye, the spear. Resistance that works is resistance that's tricky, unexpected. The reason I say that is because, much has been made of certain types of resistance, like, openly assassinating the CEO of a healthcare company by Luigi. I think most people felt some sympathy for his feelings, even if we didn't agree with the actual act. There have been calls for, violent overthrows. There's already been a lot of vandalism of Cybertrucks. Nobody feels too sorry for Elon at all, for a variety of reasons. Simply also because he doesn't feel sorry for anybody. I mean, what I'm getting at is I understand the feelings. But whatever resistance, the resistance that works is the resistance that is going to be very specifically targeted. In other words, what has worked in the past is not going to work now. And that has as much to do with the forces that are at play as it does with what resistance will teach the resistors. The resistors have things to learn too. And that's all I'll say about that. So resistance by itself, just by itself, will not work, and by itself will fail. But specific targeted resistance, openness to different kinds of resistance, especially internal resistance, unexpected, mercurial kinds of things, keeping your eye out for opportunities of resistance. Those are the kinds of things that will be targeted enough to create what is necessary to survive, thrive, and get to the next stage of this. I think the important thing here is what the resistors are being challenged with is, why are you resisting? Are you resisting because you want to go back to the way it was? Which wasn't great, folks, okay? I mean, part of the reason why this is happening, why we have auras, the forces that have been in play for a long time finally emerging, is because the status quo, which the Dems represented, which Kamala represented, God bless her, the status quo wasn't great. You know, um, you could say, well, it's better than fascism. Well, it might have been it might have been tyranny under a different guise. And now it's the tyranny is just more open and bald faced and not very competent, I might add, in a lot of ways. So this isn't just a matter of going back to where things were before. So it's important to understand what your resistance is about. Are you just resisting because you're just pissed off? I mean, that's part of what got Trump into the presidency to begin with, because you're just pissed off because you don't feel like you're in control of your life, and you feel completely disconnected from the reality that the government is actually very connected to you, and we're all connected to each other. So you voted for somebody who you could project all those hopes onto, even though this person could care less about you and doesn't care if you live or die. Okay. But I understand the feeling. I understand the feeling of being disconnected. So it's like, what are your reasons for resisting? You know, what is it really about? So simple resistance by itself is not going to work. There is something that resistors themselves have to come to terms with in order to move everything forward, and not just getting through this to the next election cycle. But there are real changes that do in fact need to be made, and would have needed to have been made if Kamala had been elected or anybody had been elected. Okay. So I think that's what the deeper challenge is there to resistors. I hope I'm making sense. So I'm going to answer just one more because I'm getting tired, and we've been doing this now for 50 minutes. That's a long time for a reading. Does the United States deserve a reading like this? I don't know. Do we? Okay. I've been being asked, this is a question I've been being asked a lot. What is the best way to survive this thing that we're in? This thing that we're in. Entertainment purposes, only for entertainment purposes. I really like this wallpaper, by the way. I love that salmon faced or that fish faced stone there. I think it's great. Ah, nice. Tiwaz, the rune of victory, integrity, and righteousness. So this is a very clear message. What is the best way to survive this? Cultivate your best self. Cultivate your most noble self. Cultivate that in you which knows what victory is. And it will be different for every person. For some people, that will mean just simply getting up and going to work in the morning. Because for some people, their jobs aren't going to change in all of this. They'll be going to work and they'll just kind of watch it all go by, you know what I mean? For some people, they are going to have to persevere. They're going to have to think differently. For some people, they're going to have to rise above their resentments. Whether you're MAGA or, a socialist or an anarchist or somebody in between, Republican, Democrat, however you define yourself, you're going to have to rise up to your best abilities. And there's a very kind of nobility actually in this rune. This is one of my favorite runes. This is kind of my guiding light rune, and in fact, this rune is connected to an asterism. What's an asterism? An asterism is a more general name for a constellation, or a star that was seen as valuable or important in any given culture. So, the Big Dipper is an asterism that we all recognize. It's part of a larger constellation or asterism called Ursa Major, or, the Great Bear. But in Northern Europe, there were a number of asterisms that were used and that are distinct to the pre-modern peoples that lived there, whether they were Germans or Scandinavians or Finns or the Sami or whomever. And Tyr was one of them. It was connected to the fixed star Sirius. I mean, I think that's, if I remember correctly, that's they're pretty sure that's the star that was used, but it was an arrow-shaped, roughly arrow-shaped asterism, and it helped to guide. It was used as a guidance, a guidance asterism for Viking ships and travelers. So it was seen as the idea basically behind Tyr is, and then Tyr himself, he was the god of the stars, the god of the heavens, a god of righteousness. In fact, his name is cognate with Deo, or God, the word for God. So, or Theo, the god, which is the Greek for God or the divine. So the message here would be to follow your star, to follow that which guides you. And it's important for everybody to do that. I mean, I know that there's a lot of concern about Project 2025, but let me tell you something. If you're following your star, if you're following what really guides you, you don't have to be afraid of that. Because the power that will come to you will completely override anything that any exterior power attempts to do to you. They think, when I read, in the first place, 2020, the Project 2025 is just the latest iteration of a project that the Heritage Foundation, which, by the way, was founded in the 1980s, early 1980s, at the same time that Ronald Reagan came to be president, and they've had they have rewritten that project every year. So there are places where it completely contradicts itself. There's no way to actually do it in any way that will make sense. It's kind of like, those people who say all of the Bible is literal, and then you read the Bible and it contradicts itself literally, and you're like, or it doesn't even make sense literally, and so you ask them about it and they're like, oh, well, that means, it's like, so, it depends on, yeah, they can't even be consistent about their own literalism. So it's not that I don't care about Project 2025, but I don't think of it as being as dangerous in some ways as some people have it be. The disassembling of the Department of Education and all that stuff, a lot of those things have been conservative goals for 40 years. So it's not like they're unique to Project 2025. The point is that regardless of what happens with all of that, follow your star. Follow your rising star. Follow that which informs you. Follow your deepest gut spirituality. Follow your guides. Pay attention to your dreams. This is what I always say to people. Pay attention to your dreams. Pay attention to your impulses. If you are a spiritually minded person, do your meditations, do your practices. If you are part of a tradition, do your tradition. Christians are going to have to handle the fact that there are lots of people around them who have different traditions and who are perfectly happy. And eventually, I do think they'll figure it out. Spirit wins in this regard. So that would be my suggestion for how you get through this. I will answer one more question. This has to do with the Earth. And my question is, are the processes of climate change going to interrupt, going to influence and interrupt, I'll put it that way, influence and interrupt the current administration's agenda? I'll put it a different way, not the current administration's agenda, but the agendas of those forces on the planet which would seek their hegemony, their own hegemony. How's that? I love the word hegemony. It's a great word. Again, this is for entertainment purposes. Oh, come on. Come on. Boop. Oh, yeah. This is great. This is a great rune. This is Awas. This is a rune of ultimate protection. In fact, this is a rune that this is like one of the oldest runes in the rune row. It's a rune that is so old that it's considered to be like maybe one of the original runes. In its Anglo-Saxon form, it is called the Wolf's Hook, and it is very specifically intended to capture and dispel evil. So it's like this massive protector thing. And basically what this is saying is, oh yeah, the planet will take care of itself, and our human best laid plans are probably going to come to naught when it comes right down to it. Some things we'll be able to do more damage if we really want to, but no, the climate changes, especially in the next 4-6 years, that's kind of the time range that I gave it in my head, are going to interfere, if you will, interfere with our warring, interfere with various policy initiatives that the present administration might want to conduct. Basically, we're talking, before you think you're going to complete your best laid plans, you better talk to Mother Nature, because she will have other ideas in mind. So, oh yeah, I take great comfort from that, actually, that protecting aspect of it. It represents, this particular rune represents the actual trunk of the world tree of Yggdrasil, and how that trunk maintains itself. I mean, in Ragnarok, in the story of Ragnarok, the world is swept away. You have fire. The fire giants come and they ruin everything, and then you have the Fimbulwinter, the winter that lasts, I think, for 3 years or something like that. And then, but through all of that, the trunk of the world tree remains. And what that really means on kind of a celestial level is that the connection between the planet and the stars remains, because that's really what the trunk is that connection of the planet to its larger reality that it is connected to the solar system and to all the other systems in the cosmos. So, oh yeah, the planet will protect itself. Yay, that's a good thing. Anyway, that is all I am going to do this evening for this. This could be a feature. If you have any questions of a cosmic nature, I am not ever going to take money for this, okay? Ever, ever, ever. If you have any questions that you would like to see addressed in a future set of entertainments, you can contact me at Professor Wham, numeral 1, at gmail.com. I just dropped a rune on the floor, and I'm going to go get it. But anyway, that is all for here. That's all for this. And I hope you enjoyed this Ghibli wallpaper. I love this. Spirited Away, if you have not seen it, is like one of the best movies ever. It's like the Japanese version of Inside Out, if you're familiar with that movie. It's really kind of like the Japanese version of it. If you watch Inside Out and then you watch Spirited Away, it's basically the same story, but from two very different cultural standpoints. It's very interesting. Anyway, toodaloo.